Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Gary Klein. He is a research psychologist and a pioneer in the field of naturalistic decision making. He has a BA in psychology from City College of New York and his PhD in experimental psychology from the University of Pittsburgh. Now, in 1973, in a prime example of how discomfort creates advancement, the Arab oil embargo forced American pilots to train in simulators. That forced their training and decision-making data into a focused, observable environment. And Dr. Klein began to investigate the way people develop expertise. In 1978, he founded his own R&D company, Klein & Associates, and began to study a range of topics that are now described as the naturalistic decision-making framework. That led to his breakthrough in the recognition prime decision model, and that describes the way people actually make decisions in natural settings. This research was subsequently incorporated in Army doctrine for command and control and led to Dr. Klein being one of the leaders of the team that redesigned the White House Situation Room. Co-hosting this episode is Bruce Gudmundsson, and we owe Bruce a debt of gratitude for instigating the interview with Dr. Klein in the first place. So thank you, Bruce. We really appreciate you. We appreciate your work as well and your acknowledgement of Dr. Klein's influence on it. You guys really should look Bruce Gudmundsson up as well. As always, if you like what we do, please help us out by giving us that 5-star review and a brief rating on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever you're listening to this fun podcast. We really appreciate the love. And I promise it'll only take you a minute. We think you'll be fascinated, and we hope you'll learn a little something from our guest today, Dr. Gary Klein.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is Gary Klein. I'm a cognitive psychologist. I study how people make life and death decisions under extreme time pressure and uncertainty. And you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, so Gary is a big thinker, probably the leading thinker in these kind of topics, the decision-making thing. You can see his work at shadowboxtraining.com. You should go there. Everybody can learn more about decision-makings and intuition and how these things intermingle. And you can definitely also follow him on Twitter. And so, Gary, what's your Twitter handle?
KLEINSIGHT, Kleinsight.
Kleinsight. And so make sure you guys go there. So when you have someone who's a master on teaching us about decision makings and all of the different things that go into that, you have to bring in Bruce Gudmundsson, who's been on the show before, because he absolutely trains young military people in this skill set. So Bruce, really briefly, give us like a synopsis of how people can find you and what you do. And then we're going to get off and running and start talking about decision making.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I want to say I've been a fan of Gary Klein and his work since the 1990s, the early 1990s. I've known him followed his work for a long time. He's done a lot to inform my own thinking and my own work for the past now 30 years nearly. So it's a real pleasure to be here on the Break It Down show with Pete and with Gary. So I'm thrilled to be here. So the best way to find me is through the Military Instructor Gateway. That is on Blogspot, and you just type in teachusmc.blogspot.com.
So what's cool about all of this is Bruce is teaching, in this case, young military officers how to make decisions. So he'll say, you're in Napoleon, it's this date and this time, and what are you going to start doing? And then what Bruce does is he uses Gary's frameworks to help create that learning environment in a way so that these young officers can understand how they're making decisions. Gary, when you hear that Bruce is using these tools to train our young military officers, what are your thoughts initially off of that?
I'm very excited. I'm very pleased that Bruce is putting them into action. I've known about Bruce's work for a couple of decades, and I've been very impressed by the research and the writings that he's generated. So I'm delighted to have him here as part of this conversation. Bruce was one of the leaders of a change in mindset in the Marines, and looks like it worked. It looks like it had an effect, and it's an amazing case study of changing the culture of an organization.
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to savethebrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
And it's an amazing case study of changing the culture of an organization.
I'm leaving room for you, Bruce.
Oh yes, well. Thank you. This is very, very kind. I think right. The work of changing the culture continues. It's an unfinished task, but I think we have made enormous progress in the past 3 decades. And Gary also played a role in that. I know that you worked closely with John Schmidt, and John Schmidt, who continues to work with us, was both the author of FMFM1 Warfighting, which I recommend that everyone read. All your listeners will gain much from it. But John Schmidt was also one of the key people in the revival of the tactical decision game, which are these simple one-step games, exercises that ask Marines to take on a role in a scenario and then solve a problem very, very quickly. And that done, having solved that problem quickly and really probably intuitively, then to reflect upon that and do an analysis of their thinking. So first it's the what you're going to do. And then after everyone has done that and that's been discussed, then people talk about the why.
Okay, so let me build on that, because I would just spend some time with John last week. We were at the Naturalistic Decision-Making Conference. We've been putting on these conferences for 30 years now. Every other year, we alternate between the U.S. and Europe. And this one we held in San Francisco just last week. And the idea is to get naturalistic decision-making researchers together to see what we've learned and how we can do our jobs better. And John was there, and he talked about a study he ran using tactical decision games just to see what kind of effect he had. So he started using tactical decision games maybe in the early 90s. And after about 4 years, he wondered, am I having any effect? And tactical decision games are simply, here's a puzzle. Here's what's going on. Here's the map. Here's what your orders are. And then this just happened. What do you do now? And so it really pushes people out of their comfort zone, pushes them to have to adapt, to be able to make decisions without much chance for thinking and for analysis. John never states this anywhere in the tactical decision games, but it pushes people to be prepared to give up what their orders were. And coming in, the culture of the Marines was, if you give me an order, I'm going to carry it out. That you can count on me. I'm going to carry out the order just as you described it. That's who I am. That's a powerful attitude. However, what if the situation is different? And what if people have to read what's going on? And so tactical decision games force them out of that mindset, force them to think about how could they possibly adapt and not follow the orders. And so month after month, he would publish one of these tactical decision games in the Marine Corps Gazette every month. Month after month, this message was coming across subliminally, because people were put in situations where the orders didn't make sense. And John wondered, after 4 years of this, he wondered, am I having any effect? So he took his very first tactical decision game, he reformulated it so that it wouldn't be clear that it was the same dynamic, and he ran it again to see how people responded. And he had all the responses from the first time and then from 4 years later. And he found a tremendous difference. He found that people, the first time, the people who responded were all over the place. And some of them gave up the orders. Some of them didn't know what to do. Some of them, just about, maybe at least half of them followed the orders, even though the orders didn't make sense anymore. And then 4 years later, when he presented it, just about everybody jettisoned the original order because it didn't make sense. So for me, that's a triumph of changing a mindset without telling people. If John had said, I'm trying to change the way you think, there would have been resistance. He didn't do that. He just month after month got that message across about the importance of being able to adapt, to use your judgment, to use your experience, to read the situation. And so it's very exciting to see.
In fact, I was present in John's first working group here in Quantico in 1989. So when we revived the TDG as a training method. And I stress the word revive because it's a very old method. I've got the oldest TDG I know about, oldest reference is 2nd century BC. And that was described by Machiavelli in the 16th century. So it's been around for a long time. The trick, and this is where having a facilitator like John Schmidt comes in, the trick is using them in the right spirit, doing exactly what John did, which was to set up these problems so that the players don't merely have to go through a process, but actually have to think and actually have to challenge their orders, really think on their feet.
Mm-hmm. And what we've been doing recently, and John is working with us. He's working with my company. He's part-time with Shadowbox Training, is to try to take this to the next stage. And what we're doing now is we're trying to help young officers, or we're trying to help anybody really who goes through this type of training, trying to help them see the world through the eyes of experts without the experts having to be there. And that's always been a bottleneck. You can maybe identify experts, but if they're experts, they're busy and they don't have time and they can't, be involved in putting on training. And so I learned about this Shadowbox method. We didn't develop it. I learned about it from a friend of mine, Neil Heinz, who was a firefighter, a battalion chief, retired from New York Fire Department, and he developed it. And the way it works is you have a challenging scenario like you do with TDGs, tactical decision games. You have a challenging scenario, and then you have decision points along the way in that scenario. And it could be, here's 4 courses of action. Rank order, which one you prefer from highest to lowest, and write down your reason. But it's not just courses of action. It could be, here's 3 goals, rank order, which is your top priority, second and third, and write down your reasons. Or it could be, here's 5 types of information, rank order how important these types of information are for what you're doing now, and write down your reason. So that's what you do if you're being trained. But we've also have a small group of maybe 3 to 5 experts go through the same scenario, the same decision points. They do their own ranking. They write down their reasons, and then we compile it. So after I've done my ranking, you show me, here's what the experts ranked. And I want my ranking to match the experts. So that's sort of the dramatic part. But the real learning comes in when we show people, here's what the experts were thinking about. Now compare it, what they wrote, to what you wrote. And all of a sudden you're realizing they're seeing things in the same scenario that never even occurred to me. They're noticing implications. They're drawing inferences. Nothing that's completely sped by me. And so you go through these, and in a short period of time, even a half a day, all of a sudden your rankings are matching the expert by 25 to 30% greater match at the end of a half day than at the beginning. You're really starting to see the world, at least these scenarios, through their eyes.
That's interesting. A lot of what I did when I would be in the combat zone was look for what the commander couldn't see, and be on the same patrol as another element and bring back a different side of that story. And oftentimes it was the Afghan side or the Iraqi side, so we could see what was possible for them. It's one thing to say, build a bridge, do this, do that, all these incredible things the military can do. But what were the things that were important to do on that day for the Iraqis that was possible for them? And then how did you link that to the government? And it was really small things. But if you're not looking for small things, if you're looking for grand gestures like rebuild the bazaar or, start up the multi-million-dollar generator and power this, government center, it's really hard to see those small things. And that orientation takes a while because it's disconcerting because you see problems everywhere. When I'm out there with my peers and they see something different because of their institutional knowledge and their training to look for, inoculate 1,000 goats instead of what the farmers really want is X, not whatever you're providing. How do you, from within that organization, nudge the dial more effectively to get the unit to be, or the commander to understand where those decisions need to change and how they can lead the people that are not on task they're not wrong, but they're not right?
Well, this ties into something that my colleagues and I have been doing recently, which is what we call a cognitive after-action review.
Okay.
Actually, we call it CARGO, Cognitive After-Action Review Guide for Observers. And the notion here, having watched, Marine exercises and Army exercises, there's after-action reviews. And typically the after-action reviews, and maybe they've changed since I've seen the last one, typically it's you went left and you should have gone right. You did X and you should have done Y. But it's not, what were you noticing? What were you picking up? In hindsight, what could you have been paying more attention to? Because if we can't be smart in hindsight, we can never be smart. And so I think in terms of building up your units so that they acquire the sensitivity that you just described, Pete, you could give lectures and things, but I think it has a greater impact if you talk about what happened in the last patrol and what were people noticing and what could they have been noticing. And you keep doing that. It's really about the cognitive part of what they're doing rather than just you went left and you should have gone right.
What were you thinking?
Well, that's what motivates you, Bruce. But you don't want to say it that way because that doesn't encourage discussion. That might encourage defensiveness.
I'm being deliberately ironic here. It is interesting that we have this cultural baggage when somebody says, "What were you thinking?" It can be seen as an accusation, but if you do it right, that's you're actually saying that question, but in a very different tone of voice. So, Pete, Gary, what was on your mind when you made that decision? What did you see?
Right. We once had an experience where we were providing cognitive skills training for Los Angeles County Fire Department. And we had their training officers in the workshop. And it was a 3-part workshop because I prefer not to do like one workshop arrangements where people are excited, then they walk out, then they get overtaken by events and they never think about it before. So we have them come back a second time a month later to see how's it going. And then then a third time 2 months later for a shorter workshop to see how's it going. So in the first one, this one senior firefighter, a battalion chief said, "Can you use this with people who are attitude problems?" And to me, that sounded like clinical psychology, and I don't do clinical psychology. So I said, no, it's not for attitude problems or people who have psychological problems. It's really about training decision-making skills. And he said, he sort of, shook his head. Then he came back a month later and he said, "You guys are wrong. Let me tell you what happened. I was asking last time about attitude problems because I have this one guy in my unit and he's a real jerk. And I don't know how he got through the training. Now he's in my department. And I really just think we have to wash him out. He's never doing what he's supposed to do." And so after the last workshop, we had a run. We went out to put out the fire, and I gave him some direction, and he didn't follow orders the way I expected him to. And I said at the end, "Come into my office when we all get back and get cleaned up." And he came into my office, and we had given him a poster, and he said, "I was about to ream him out like I always do because I keep writing him up, and eventually we'll wash him out." But before I did, I looked at the poster about how to do this kind of work. And I thought, well, let me give it a try. Then I'll ream him out and do the "what were you thinking?" So instead of saying, "What were you thinking?" I said, "So when this happened, you handled it in a way that I wasn't expecting. Tell me what was on your mind. And then this senior firefighter told our class, he said, he explained what he was thinking about, and it made a lot of sense. And it wasn't what I expected, but it was actually pretty clever. And at that moment, I realized he wasn't the attitude problem. I was the attitude problem. So you can question people, but the way you question it, and whether you're sincerely interested in what was in their mind, that's the essence of doing a cognitive after action review.
So this sounds very Socratic to me. I mean, genuinely Socratic. You're not trying to lead someone to a conclusion, but really what you're asking an open-ended question out of genuine curiosity about his point of view.
Exactly. Yes.
That brings up a lot of questions. Let me go back to the shared experience analysis stuff. So when you go out, you can say, what were you thinking? But in all honesty, when you're deployed as a battalion, you've got these attached enablers. You don't really do that. You don't really sit back and say, what did we all see? We all go back, we write our individual reports, we shoot them out. And in my case, I shoot them to everybody. So this is what I saw. And I don't mind you guys questioning my analysis because I expect that and I want that, need that. But you can't question what I saw. What I often got back were rejections on what I saw because we're in the same patrol, but I'm looking for different things because of my unique experience in staying through unit after unit after unit and seeing this, the same institutional based mistakes. I had, the unfortunate fortune of seeing a lot of my own and the unit mistakes. So when you can't practically have an after action review and all the reports have been written, you can have one, but it's down at the platoon level. It's immediate and then it's over. And then let's be honest, most after action reports or reviews really go nowhere. It doesn't change institutional behavior. It's just something that you have to ensure that you've done so that nobody above you gets mad at you for not checking that block.
Right.
I came, I saw, I conquered.
Yes, we won. Didn't you see?
Right. So I'm thinking about these as having the primary value for the members of your platoon.
Right. Okay.
To get the advantage of what you saw that they missed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you were providing to them. And the next step would be for them to take your report and circle all the things that you picked up on that were all the things that were in front of their eyes.
Sure.
That when zooming past them. That's where I see the value.
The other thing that would happen, and this is the indirect, because the officers usually are, they're picked because they're the best amongst their peers. That's why they're leading in a combat zone. The colonel gets the report as well, and so does the brigade commander. They're getting the full report still at this point. And they're able to slowly nudge the unit through their own leadership, whether it's the specific enabler or the unit. I remember one brigade commander saying, we're going to stop doing as many things wrong and we're going to get more things right. I don't want a big pile of, he said the word shit. I don't want a big pile of shit in the middle of the room that we did and got wrong. I want a few things that we got right that are going to last. And so that was based on our reports, slowly nudging this unit away from this lethal focus to more of a state building focus, quite frankly. So that it worked in that. It didn't work necessarily in the after action review angle because it was just too hard to swallow. But when the commander started giving out his intent, the pens went up, people started writing and changing how they approach these problems. Bruce, when you hear that, like that lesson from the field come down, how does that hit with you when you're trying to give, because the lieutenant or the captain in this case who's running a platoon is standing next to another captain who's running an enabler team, and one of them gets it and the other one doesn't.
I'm drawn back to the idea of Socratic conversation.
Okay.
Of asking questions in a spirit of openness, in a spirit of genuine inquiry, not rhetorical questions, not questions that are punitive, but genuine questions that ask about, what's really going on here? One of the great teachers of tactical decision games from the early 20th century, Ferdinand Foch, liked to say, de quoi s'agit-il? What's going on here? What's really going on here? Let's forget our theories. Let's forget previous experience. Let's just focus on what actually happened. So you want to be able to ask that question. Another way of looking at it is using the word critique very carefully. Critique as the idea of finding fault. But I think there's another definition of critique, a much more useful one, that Clausewitz provides for us in the 5th chapter of On War, where he talks about the application of abstract thought, deliberate thought, to particular events. And again, you're asking, what's going on here? How does this relate to what I already know? How does this relate to the way I'm making sense of the world? How does this relate to my cognition? What in fact was I thinking? This broader, deeper view of critique is something that I think I'd like to see more of in our military culture.
So let me provide my perspective on what you just said, Bruce. For me, it boils down. I hate to when people say it boils down, because that always gets ridiculous. But it does boil down to one word, and that word is curiosity.
Okay.
And I remember a very senior instructor in the petrochemical industry told me at the beginning of his career as a tech leader and an instructor, he was just waiting for people to make mistakes, and then he would slam them. And that's the way they would have better performance, because they would reduce the number of mistakes. And after a while, he realized he wasn't getting very far. And then he started, instead of looking for mistakes to slam, if somebody made a mistake, instead of slamming the person, he'd wonder, why did the person, this is a smart person who wants to do a good job. So why did the person go down that road? And he would be genuinely curious to see what he could learn, and maybe there was a good reason for it. So it was the switch from the punitive to the curious. And I think that's what I'm hearing in what you're describing, Bruce, and that to initiate that kind of curiosity during critiques and during responses would be, I think, an extremely powerful mindset shift.
Yes. And it's a very hard thing to do, because so much of our schooling, I won't use the word education, but I'll say schooling is about producing the right answer at the right time, and producing it in a way that's unequivocal. You have to be able to say things with confidence. You give the solution to the math problem with confidence. You don't say, well, maybe I could be wrong. Maybe I've missed a step here. You just give the number, and if you're right, you're right. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And we reward people for this kind of certainty, as opposed to rewarding them for curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Now, a friend of mine, Phil Jose, a retired senior officer in the Seattle Fire Department and head of their training for many years, said he was trying to get this across. And he worked hard to get it across, and he wasn't particularly successful. Only about 30% of his instructors could make that mindset shift. And so he was a little frustrated by that. But he said, in a way, the next generation was picking up on it, because they had a chance to see the different instructors, the ones who would question with real, genuine curiosity, and the ones who were questioning with, what were you thinking? And they could see the difference. And so when they were becoming instructors, they were buying into it, because they had seen the effect it had on them. Now, there's another thing I want to bring up here that we've been talking about, is a simple diagram that I've created. And I don't have to show you the diagram. I can just describe it. It's about improving performance. And to improve performance, there's two arrows, one going down and one going up.
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Improve performance, there's two arrows, one going down and one going up. And you need to engage in both of those arrows. The one going down is what you have to reduce. And what you have to reduce is mistakes, is errors. And organizations have lots of ways of trying to reduce mistakes. They come up with procedures and checklists and focus on that. What you have to increase, the up arrow, what you want to increase is expertise. You want to increase insights. And most organizations don't pay any attention to the up arrow. But you really need both. You don't want to go home at the end of the day just thinking about the down arrow. You don't want to go home and say, I had a great day. I didn't make any mistakes. That's not a really productive day. You need to do both of these things. And listening to you, Bruce, I think you're also advocating for an orientation that includes the up arrow, that includes a chance for people to make discoveries and to increase their expertise.
How do you hold those discoveries and expertise? I mean, I would watch unit after unit roll in with the same level of training, but not the same level of expertise, and actually a disregard, knowing full well that there is a trough in a unit changeover in expertise. The unit would reject this theory of learning from the unit before and commence immediately making the same misorientation mistakes.
That's an interesting observation. How do you break through that?
Yeah. I mean, I had it down to a science too, where I couldn't even enter into the decision-making cycle with that unit for at least 3 weeks. Like, I basically would shut down. I would continue to do my regular work, but my interaction with them was just cursory. Like, I was present, I was earning my way in, but I was never part of the handoff. And even when I was, and they would say, listen to what Pete says, he will help you figure it out, it would still take them 3 weeks or 3 months to get to that point. And by then, the amount of change that could happen was very limited, because at some point they start bagging things up and going home.
Right. It's hard to do that. And I've actually written about this recently. There are many parts of our society, our culture, that are trying to question expertise and the value of expertise and trying to replace expertise. There's people in the artificial intelligence community are saying, we don't need experts anymore. We're going to have supercomputers relying on machine learning. The proceduralists, everything can be boiled down to procedures. Just follow the procedures and you'll be okay. And we, best practices movement. Here's what the best practices are. And the best practices may sound good in theory, but if you're a physician, for example, you've got to deal with a patient, and your patient may have several things that are causing problems, and you've got to figure out what makes sense for this patient, not what's the best practice according to the literature. So expertise is under attack in many places, and it's kind of unnerving to see that spreading. And one of the ways it's under attack is the heuristics and biases movement, claiming that everybody, even experts, are biased. So why listen to them? And I think that's totally misguided, but that's part of the attack on expertise these days.
And I think that a big part of the answer, so I think that what we need to do is get these heuristics people and these artificial intelligence people and send them through a copy each of one of your books, because I think that each one of those movements you mentioned, the advocates fall into one of two mistakes. Either they overvalue rationality or they overvalue naturalistic, heuristic decision-making. And I think the beauty in your work, if I may boil it down, and I know there's always a danger in reductionism, but it seems to me that the essence of your work is striking the proper balance between rationality, thinking things through, using analysis, using formal thought, deliberate thought, and trusting or being informed by your instincts. I'm using the word instincts with the air quotes. Your intuitions, that's the word I'm looking for. So, and these things, they exist in the healthy decision maker. They exist in harmony with each other, and they're informing each other. Pete, you were telling me the story of your friend and her tires.
Yes. Yeah, so I had a friend on Facebook, and she was like, trust your gut, your intuition. because today I went out before I went to work and I saw my tire and it was threadbare and it was about to blow. It was down through 2 sets of thread. It was going to blow any moment. And so to her, in her mind, that was her gut, her woman's intuition saving her life. And then I had to add, put in the note on the comment stream, why didn't your gut tell you this a week ago?
Right. And there are people, who solve that problem in a very rational way. Every week they go out, they take their penny. If you can see Lincoln, you're okay. You put the penny in the tread, and if you can't see, or actually, I guess if you can't see Lincoln, you're okay. If you can see Lincoln, you got a problem, right? There's a rational method, a procedure for checking obviously there's more to checking your tires. As a former motor transport Marine, I should know that. These two things, they're logical opposites, but in a healthy mind, you want the ability to do both, and not just do both, but to have the one inform the other. To always be, challenging your intuition with analysis and challenging your analysis with intuition.
So let me react to that, because I'm really glad that you brought that point up, Bruce, because you're exactly right. In my opinion, you're exactly right. And I have this model of decision making, a recognition prime decision model. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people describe it as trust your gut and just go with your gut. And it really, really annoys me, because that's only half of the model. The model has 2 parts. There's using pattern matching, which is where your intuition comes from, using your experience, but then using a process, usually mental simulation, to think it through consciously and deliberately to see if it makes sense in this situation. So it's a blend of intuition and analysis, exactly as you described, Bruce. And it's not just trusting your gut. Now, Pete, your tire story, I'm going to guess here. I'm just hearing the story for the first time.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that the reason she didn't see it a week earlier is she didn't look at her tire. Maybe, the tires, when she got to her car, they were all straight. And maybe on this day, she had turned the steering wheel before she got out of the car. So the tires were visible in a way that they usually weren't. So I'm guessing, I'm imagining that that's why she saw it this day than other days. But I've got my own tire story.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear it.
So my wife and I were on a bicycle trip across Ohio, 3,000 bicyclists, called the Great Ohio Bicycle Adventure. So we would go like 50, 60 miles a day and go from town to town. We would sleep out in tents. It was great fun. And one day, her tire it looked like it was low. We pulled off, and sure enough, there was a leak, and we needed to change it. And it was her rear tire, I think. And so I'll confess, I'm a klutz. So I didn't have the capability of of changing it. And somebody, because it's a very nice community, somebody stopped by and said, I can do it. And so he got the old tire off, pumped it up, then tried to put it in, and he couldn't get it in because it was too fat to fit within the brakes, and he had to deflate it to get it in, and then he had to pump it up. And I was very grateful for him. And we went off, and there was an official tire changing station that we passed maybe a few miles later. And I told her, let's stop off here. And she said, why? And I said, I wanted them to check your tire. And sure enough, when he had inflated it, he hadn't done it properly, and part of the tube was caught, and it would have caused a catastrophic blowout.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason that I was nervous about what he was doing was he hadn't realized that when putting it on, he couldn't inflate it fully because it wouldn't fit within the brakes. And to me, that meant he hadn't done much tire changing recently.
Right.
And so his expertise was lower than I wanted. That, to me, that was the tell that he hadn't anticipated this. So that, I think that's the kind of small cue, Pete, that you're talking about, the little things that we pick up.
I want to change gears a little bit, because you guys have said a lot of great things, heuristics and decision making. And one of the things I learned to do was I crafted lenses and rules, some heuristic type things. Like in stability operations, we have to accept that instability is the norm, and our mere presence creates more instability. And stability seems to act like a bow. So instability is the norm. It's the bow at rest. And then a unit will come in, pull the bow back, and create stability. But the moment that that unit leaves, that instability is gone. And then the new one comes in and they pull the bow, and so that's the norm. So if you look at like everything we're going to do is going to cause instability unless we're constantly fighting that to hold that bow some other way. So whether it's agricultural operations or rule of law, there is an existing rule of law. It's just informal. So you're transitioning from one to the other. Well, that is not an easy thing to do. And it's very simple to think that because of my decision making and my processes and all of my institutional knowledge, I can bring rule of law to this valley. When the reality is no, you can't, because that bow is going to relax into the normal unstable relationship that it normally has. So, and part of the problem with this is that we don't develop cultural acuity at an institutional level in military units. I can't say the same for disaster relief folks or cops or police, but I have a sense that they have a cultural acuity problem too. So people will talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, quite a bit, but not CQ in a way that displays any level of expertise. And I think that my experience tells me that if you don't understand the goals and decision-making of the person that we're trying to work with, especially if we're in their cultural space, then we are not in the collaborative quadrant. We're in some other quadrant that gives you results like incompetence, passive-aggressive behavior, and then corruption would be another one, because you're not in line with what they're doing, because you haven't developed the lens to say, what is this culture? How do they do things? And what's possible here right now? So that's sort of my premise. I thought maybe I'd get you guys to kind of talk about joining culture and finding rules of thumb to put in place so that you can give yourself, because it's hard to see. You have to learn this stuff by making mistakes, and it's hard to see your own failures over and over again, equaling anything other than a bunch of failure, and nobody likes that. I'm going to shut up now, and I guess if you would start off, either one of you, let's talk about that.
If I may, I'll tell you a story about an imaginary opera company.
I love it.
We're expecting it for you, Pete. Yeah? Okay, so here's an opera company, and this is a story told by my friend Bill Lind, who is also a friend of John Schmidt's and very much involved in the maneuver warfare movement. And so this opera company does Aida, and it's a great Aida because you've even got elephants. I mean, you've got the paper mache pyramids, you got all the people who walk like Egyptians, you've got all the guys carrying the spears, you've got the palm trees, and you've got elephants. I mean, and you do this great Aida. But every time you start booking shows, people want different things. They want the Beatles tribute band. They want musical comedy. They want everything but Aida. And you're always frustrated by your inability to put on Aida, because that's the ideal. And that was what we were trained for. And this really is the history of the U.S. Army, and to a lesser extent the Marine Corps, but very much the Army, right? The Army has this idea that we're going to do Aida.
Yes.
Right. And back in 1991, we had Desert Storm and we got close, and it was a thing of beauty, and everybody was happy. I mean, there was dancing in the streets, dancing in the hall after Desert Storm, because finally this was something like the war we wanted to fight. Ever since then, and actually before then, we've had all these other requirements, and we're really setting up people for failure. We're saying it's going to look this way. Follow this pattern. And not only we're going to tell you what the pattern is, but we've got all these manuals which tell you exactly what the pattern is.
Yes.
And these manuals this is the libretto for Aida. And so everybody is disappointed, rather than starting every morning with, okay, you're in a new situation. Here's a problem, solve it. And making sure you have a wide variety of problems from a wide variety of points of view.
Okay, so I think that's a great story about what people are expecting and our tendency to be oblivious to where they are. And I agree with that. My wife, Helen Klein, wrote an article and it appeared in Military Review about this issue, about cultural differences. one of her areas of specialty is what different ways that cultures think. And we just assume that everybody thinks the way we do, and it turns out to be fairly misguided, and in some cases very dangerous, because our assumption is wrong. And the research is clear, and the practice is clear, that when you encounter different cultures, you're going to be either surprised, but usually you're going to be contemptuous. What's wrong with them?
Right.
Back to Bruce's comment, what were you thinking? Just become impatient with them. So we see somebody giving, a leader giving jobs to relatives, and we say that's corrupt. But in a different culture, he wasn't giving jobs to relatives. It would be outrageous. That's what relatives do. That's what it means to be a member of a tribe. That we have some of the ways that cultures differ. We have a very independent culture. We think about ourselves and our own decisions, as opposed to very collective, interdependent cultures where people are trying to find out what's going on here, and rather than I'm supposed to think for myself. There's differences in fatalism versus mastery. We have the arrogance of thinking we can solve things, rather than cultures that think these problems are not going to go away. And they look at us and they think, this is just ridiculous. This is just childish to think you can solve all these problems by coming in and making a few interventions. And we look at them, what's wrong with them? They're so passive. They're not trying to make any changes, and we get angry at them. There's a difference in achievement versus relationship, where we take positions and we want to do a good job and we want to achieve things, regardless of whose noses get bent out of shape, because at the end of the day, what matters is, did we get the job done? But for other cultures, what matters at the end of the day is our relationships preserved and honored and respected. Even if the job isn't done, we still have to work together. And so power distance is another big one that's been cited very often. We're very concerned about making sure everybody gets heard. And in other cultures, they're very concerned about respecting who the leader is. And so if you've got a criticism in a high power distance culture, and there's a leader, you don't just say, wait a second, I don't agree with that. Yeah. I mean, that's just rude. That just shows that you can't be part of the team. Whereas, what's typical there would be either not to say anything, or quietly during a break, or find some way to get your ideas across without publicly challenging a leader. So all of these are differences in the way people think and the way that they socially interact. And the problem that we were encountering is, for many of the military, they went into the military without much experience in other countries and with other cultures. And maybe they grew up in small towns, and some of them had never been more than 30 miles away from the town that they grew up in. So they would have trouble in American culture, let alone, bring them to Iraq or Afghanistan. At least that's our suspicion or claim. Pete, you can tell me if that lines up with what you were seeing.
No, I think it does. I mean, you talked about the fatalism thing, and do you have a mastery of Al-Ghazali, or even know that he existed and why he would be important to fatalism and giving up to God's will? I just wrote a peer-reviewed paper with my research partner, Dr. Leday, and we were challenging the ethical pitfalls of doing female engagement and empowerment in conflict zones, because there's only so many ethical things you can do and continue to be ethically correct. So if a commander, especially a maneuver commander, is going to deploy, they have to give their unit as much lethality training as they can. And yet here comes this other thing that has nothing to do with lethality. Who's going to tell them that, they're the ones that have to write the letters home to the kids that don't come back? And so when someone's like, yeah, but we're going to go empower females over there, well, that's great. But, who's going to do that training, and who's going to build that proficiency here in this unit? So all of these things that you're talking about, that power distance thing, here's a great story of that. And people in the show have heard this before, but for your guys' sake, we're in a district center, the most populous district. and the governor is talking, and he's having an open discussion. And let's call it a discussion, be nice, but really a disagreement with the State Department representative there. And the State Department representative was telling the governor what he was and wasn't going to do with his own space. And the governor said, no, I'm going to put something else over there. And then the State Department person rolled their eyes at the governor. And, the meeting continued. So we know enough on my side, Dr. Rich and I, to go, okay, let's see where the governor goes after this meeting's over. And he left the government center, went back to the American side of the camp, and he hung out with the PsyOps guys because they had video games, and he was so irate, he wanted just to go kill zombie Nazis in a video game rather than go govern his district because he was so pissed off because of this power distance violation that the Kennedy School of Government graduate had no idea he had committed.
I heard a story from Desert Storm as we were coordinating our air campaign with the various partners, including the Saudis. And there was one major meeting of top officers from each of the countries. And the Saudi representative was late coming to the meeting. The Air Force general, I think he was a 3-star, his aide, a colonel, was talking to him. And the aide, was talking and standing up, and then he said, just sit down. So the aide sat down in the Saudi general's chair.
Oh, no. No.
And, they just started, there's a chair, it's empty, just sit down, we'll talk. And the Saudi general comes in, looks around, looks what's happened in his chair, and he just sort of stands there, and he doesn't leave, but he doesn't say anything for the whole meeting. And then the meeting is over, and he leaves, and the 3-star goes running after him because he knows something's wrong. The Saudi general said, okay, by rights, I should withdraw from this coalition because I've been dishonored.
Yeah.
But because this is so important, I'm only going to disengage for a week to show my displeasure. In the middle of a war. War. But, that's what he had been dishonored in a way that our guys were totally oblivious to.
I want to take a second to add some more color to that, too. So when you are in a place where there's a lot of sheikhs and there's a hierarchy, and it's really impossible to come in and have a mastery of that locally in any kind of reasonable time frame. So you set out chairs and you sort of let them sort it out, because what will happen is the sheikhs will come in and they don't know who's coming, who's not coming. There's a whole lot of, inshallah, God willing, they'll be there. But you'll see them get up and re-rank themselves into the proper order. And so you just accept that is part of what they do. And if you happen to develop some mastery in that, great. But mostly, you don't have to mess with it. They'll sort it out for you.
Right. It's a self-organizing system.
Yes. Bruce, I didn't hear from you on that. I want to make sure we leave room for you.
Yes, no. The question that keeps popping into my head as we have these discussions is, how can we teach all these skills we have been describing over the past, nearly an hour now? How do we teach people, or how do we help people teach themselves? How do we cultivate these virtues, this balancing of rationality and intuition, this ability to avoid mistakes on the one hand and develop expertise on the other, this ability to do things, to have these lethal skills, which are unforgiving, right? If you activate your hand grenade in the wrong order, well, that's a mistake you only make once.
Yeah.
It is thumb, pull, pin. That is the order, right? But at the same time, you want to develop all of these. I dislike the term soft skills, but these perception of subtleties. How do you build a system that promotes these skills?
Boy.
Well, nobody really knows, because it's a monumental job. I've discussed two of the approaches that we've been working on, and tactical decision game, shadow box method of using scenarios to get people up to speed, and then this cognitive after action review. But another thing you can do is stop doing the wrong thing, which is protecting yourself by believing that we can proceduralize everything and eventually it can be turned over to smart machines. And we see experiments like the Navy, with some of their experiments with ships with reduced staffing so that everybody is a generalist and everybody can quickly master other jobs. Well, they can master the procedures, but they can't take the 5 or 10 years that's required to become an expert. And so we're seeing a devaluation of the importance of expertise and the convenient assumption that it can all be proceduralized and it can all be handled and we don't have to devote time and training that you're talking about, Bruce, because that's expensive and it's inefficient. And so people are preferring to believe that it's not necessary.
And the thing with culture is that it provides variables that you can't see unless you have cultural acuity, which is not easy. Again, 5-10 years of making a lot of mistakes and winnowing those mistakes down to that you have the ability to accept, and I call it miscomfort because it's not discomfort. It's just you don't know what that comfort is. So you accept that and know that while you're in that miscomfort stage, you're quickly gathering the cultural sensibility for that region or that institution or that interaction that you need to be able to get to a completely different place that unlocks your ability to not only accomplish your goal, but to use their smooth, established cultural paths. But you can't do that unless you can withstand a lot of miscomfort. And I don't know how you train for that specifically.
Well, my suggestion is that given, say, the Marine Corps and the way the Marine Corps gets thrust into all parts of the world, there's no way to prepare training for every region or, every type of culture that you might be thrust into. And if you provided all of that, there'd be no time to do anything else.
Right.
But what you can do is try to cure people of the belief that everybody thinks like us and everybody relates like we do, and that this is going to be a different environment, and you need to be curious. That we don't know what the differences are. You're going to have to make those discoveries for yourself, but you're going to have to make discoveries rather than just dismiss people and be contemptuous of them because they don't act like we do.
Bruce?
So you're saying that Walt Disney lied. It is not a small world, after all. So this is a problem I have been, engaging for a long time. And I think that part of the solution is to use decision games, and lots of them. Some will be tactical, some will be cultural, some will defy categorization. And I have a strong prejudice in favor of decision games that are based upon real events. We sometimes call these decision-forcing cases. So from the point of view of the player, this is very much like a decision game. You are this person in this situation, what do you do? But at the end, you have the rest of the story. You have the reveal. You have what actually happened in the real world. And that provides a baseline against which people can judge their decisions. And if you draw these cases from a wide enough variety of sources, from a multitude of cultures, in a multitude of times, of course, the past is a different country, as historians like to say, that if you give people a variety of these scenarios and then show them how the person in that situation reacted, the decision that was made by somebody who was actually there, they get experience, vicarious experience of a wide variety of cultures. And that the trick is casting the net widely and making sure that, for example, I teach one of these a week, 3 times, twice online and one in person here in Quantico. And this week we have a tactical problem. And it seems very simple. Where do you put your artillery? On a hill. Seems like a cut and dry tactical problem, except that the person making this decision is a very political actor. He's actually a Nicaraguan gentleman by the name of Benjamin Zeledon. It's 1912. He's trained as a lawyer. He's a very young man. The term general is an honorific. but he finds himself in command of this rather mixed bag of fighters, some of whom are professional soldiers, some of whom are volunteers, some of whom belong to his political party, some of whom belong to the political party of someone who until a few months ago was his opponent. And he's going to have a very different way of looking at this problem. So in short, again, I don't want to boil things down to reductionist, but a big way of a powerful technique for learning these skills is role play. Is not just do the decision game in your own role, being yourself, or being somebody you might be in 2 or 3 years or 20 years or so, but saying, no, you're not the commanding an American force in the present day. You're commanding a group of Nicaraguan insurrectos in 1912. You're commanding you're the sheikh of an Iraqi tribe in 2005. You're Alexander the Great. You're Napoleon Bonaparte. But you're somebody other than the person you are, and a person from a different culture. Anyway, that's my partial answer to this, to both the cultural problem and the problem of how do we develop people, how do we promote this pair of virtues that Gary talks about in his books.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and we've been at it for just over an hour, and I want to respect your guys' time. It seems like we might have to do more because it's just such an interesting exchange between a lot of expertise in this. It's just been such a treat, and I wanted to thank you guys for it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it very much, and I'm glad that Bruce has been in on the discussion. It's always a delight having an interaction with him.
Well, thank you, and Gary, it's nice seeing you again and talking to you again, and I hope we'll get together sometime soon.
I hope so too.